This is a CNA podcast.
In 2013, Typhoon Haiyan slammed into the Philippines, and to this day remains one of the deadliest typhoons on record. Thousands lost their lives, and millions more had their homes swept away. In the ashes of that devastation sat a young Filipino who, like many others, had arrived to do whatever he could to help the victims. Nearly a decade later, Illac is now global director of an organization called Leader of Light. It's a non-governmental organization that was founded in the Philippines but has since expanded to over 15 countries. It adopts a surprisingly simple concept of taking whatever is available in a community. For example, recycle plastic bottles filled with water with a splash of bleach and turning them into solar lamps that light up homes without electricity. Leader of Light's open source technology has been recognized by the United Nations and adopted for use in some UN refugee camps. Illac joins me today on the Climate Conversations, and he dials in from Dubai to share with me what's at the heart of the social entrepreneurship, what motivates him, and what he gets out of helping the weakest people in a climate-stressed world. So, Illac, welcome to Climate Conversations. Great to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Let's start with how your journey as a social entrepreneur began. And you have spoken about it before, arriving in the aftermath of a deadly typhoon and feeling terribly small in terms of what you as a lone individual could do to help. I mean, give us a sense of that time in your life. And when did things begin to change?
I had just graduated from urban planning from the States, and I was just setting up my office when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines.
On Primetime Asia tonight, a U.S. aircraft carrier has arrived off the Philippines coast, bringing badly needed aid for the millions affected by Typhoon Haiyan.
To give you an idea what that feels like, it's like strapping yourself to the plane as it's about to take off. That's the terminal speed. And so for a community that's never had this before, the water really gathered up about 20 feet and the storm surge rushed into Tacloban at 100 plus kilometers per hour, about 180, almost to 200. The heads of the coconut would snap. The numbers were pretty devastating. Within 24 hours, about 10,000 people died and 4 million houses destroyed. So it was really a country that really did not contribute to these climate changes, but we could see that it was a population that was least likely to be able to adapt to this kind of monster storms. So my first idea is rebuilding climate resilient schools. So one of the things I realized is there were thousands and thousands of plastic bottles that were thrown away, or there was actually two plastic bottle plants that were destroyed. And so I rebuilt it by filling it up. I cooked lime, mixed it with bottles of earth, and started rebuilding the schools with the bottles that were thrown away. And the rest of the bottles I built into what is now the global organization Leader of Light.
Yeah, I saw incredible pictures of the classrooms, all the community centers that you made out of plastic bottles. But let's talk more about your solar lighting movement. The solar bottle light is made up of simplest of parts, right? A plastic bottle, water, and chlorine. Tell me, how bright is it really? And how much is it? Is it long lasting?
I started going to see that there were soft drink plants once again where I was building schools. And I remember the refraction when light would bounce in water. And I started seeing if they're not going to be lights, then refraction would be something. And so using a plastic bottle filled with water and then a little drops of bleach to keep it clear. One half of the bottle would be above the roof and one half would be below. And we would start installing plastic bottle. Basically, these are tube lights. And the light from the sun above would refract through the bottled water and then be like a 50-watt light bulb lighting from the inside. And so we would hire people that were unemployed to be able to install these lights in bunkhouses. There was a problem during the night which was safety, especially for women who were bringing food from the aid camps to the bunkhouses. Remember, this is not a reflection on anyone. It's just, desperate times. There was little food. And so light at night was becoming very important.
Hi, I'm Adrian Tan.
And I'm Crispina Robert.
We are the host of a new podcast called Work It.
We're here to get into the essential things that no one tells you about working in company culture, from office politics to dealing with burnout.
If you've ever wanted to eavesdrop on an interesting conversation by the water cooler,
This podcast is for you.
look out for our episodes wherever you get your podcast.
So you really, through this technology, the solution, you brighten people's homes, their lives, allow quality time with the family, gives access to education and safety and health. Were there any ideas that didn't work out, perhaps looked promising on paper, but didn't quite materialize?
Well, there were a bit of
Hiccups?
yeah, so I did a bicycle washing machine. So I was worried about the water. Well, it worked, except that it was just a little bit too difficult. So we put water in a drum, and then we would bike, pedal, and then the water would spin inside because the drum has many holes. And then it would wash clothes, right? It was successful, but people preferred to wash their clothes in the river. And I was trying to say, don't do it, because that water was needed for drinking water. And so the custom of washing in the river was very hard to displace. And so we needed to bring in later on, of course, clean, drinkable water.
Many in the Philippines, including some of my colleagues from your home country, remember your heydays as a model and an actor. You've come a long way to reinvent yourself as a social innovator and entrepreneur. What's the best thing about being a social entrepreneur? I'm sure there are a lot of young listeners out there. What would you say was the most memorable moment in your journey so far?
Well, that liter of light, that movement from out in the Pacific Islands, is now in 32 countries around the world.
Wow.
We have 1,200 volunteers. We have people that use pottery to make these solar lights in Morocco. We have the Rohingya. We have as far as Chile. And before COVID started, I would spend about 3 weeks in the Amazon, just lighting the Amazon. But the most important part is ideas from Asia were always looked upon sometimes as the victims of climate change or the endpoint of disaster, but they never know what happens after disaster. They never gave us a chance to tell our story, that many of us have risen up, and in fact, some of us have changed the world. So they don't give us a victor story. Many of the funds for films are mostly about the disaster, which ends up at the lowest point. But they never give us a climate story where they allow us to tell a different story, where we're actually resilient. We actually came out, and sometimes some ideas have changed the world. And so our operations, and one of the biggest experience for me is, there are ideas from Asia where we're not beneficiaries, we're not handouts, we're actually benefactors, and we actually can lead movements that can affect millions of lives. So these are stories that are not heard. And just like Liter of Light, it might be a bottle, but it's affected a million lives a year.
Your foundation was born during one of the worst typhoons more than a decade ago in the Philippines. And the sad news is that we are seeing more and more of such an extreme weather events worsened by climate change. Your country, being part of the typhoon belt, has borne the brunt of this. Do you think your country is adequately prepared to protect its people from future adverse effects of climate change? Is it time to rethink how we sort of manage infrastructure development and support for the vulnerable communities?
I believe the Pacific group of islands, these kind of monster storms, really were unprepared. Least contributing to it, but least able to adapt. I mean, I just came in from our operations in India, and it was one of the hottest
Right.
in their history. And once again, in the Philippines, it's also the hottest. So the whole thought of infrastructure, or this kind of emergency architecture, or architecture designed to withstand this new kind of trials. That's why Litter of Light was built not as just a lighting system, but as an emergency lighting system. And the best way to do it was to arm everybody in the Philippines to be able to build it by hand when we need it, right? And we taught thousands of corporate people. So our business model for Liter of Light is we would go into companies, we would bring materials, and they would pay for the experience of building the lights by hand. We just did IKEA, like 2,000 lights built by hand. And we donate that for free to the women cooperatives so that they don't have to use kerosene for their villages. But we have this army on standby for this kind of large scale typhoons.
Hi, my name is Steve Lai,
And I'm Teresa Tang.
and we are the hosts of the new podcast, CNA Correspondent.
From New York to Bangkok, join us as we kick back and chat with our colleagues across the globe about the latest news developments.
Look out for our weekly episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Once again, the experience of using a business model called social enterprise was able for me to hire, get good office, and get good staff to be able to make these big changes around the world. And so the Philippines is really going to have bigger trouble as the world keeps on heating up. This huge engine for typhoons, which is the Pacific, is going to get hotter and hotter. Cities like Ondoy, after Haiyan, sank 80% of the city underwater. And so I don't think we're going to be able to adapt without the proper investment. So every year I go to the climate change conference, and every year we get promises. Climate action is needed, but the investments are not coming in, and these kind of adaptive communities are still not coming in. How do you beat 300 kilometer per hour winds? That is still something that majority of the 100 plus million Filipinos are unable to adopt. Maybe 5%, 10%. I don't know.
Yeah. Illac, your organization has since expanded to over 30 countries, did you say? I mean,
32. Yeah.
32 to be exact. How do you see efforts to provide sustainable electricity growing around the world in the years ahead?
There's two ways, right? There's the heavy finance, intensive construction, or what is called the large scale projects. But mostly what I see is because it's so heavy in investment, it jumps over communities that live on $2 a day, where I started. And so it needs to be balanced out with community built solar products. I really believe that there's two ways to do it. Put it in the hands of large businesses and large government, or what I basically saw is when you empower women cooperatives, our fund making is to go into corporates and ask them to build solar lights, just like the Habitat for Humanity, charge them 20-25% more for the experience of managing this, and then donating for the women cooperatives. So instead of them going to the cities every 2 weeks to fill up drums of kerosene, they would now go to the city to buy little parts, which would provide clean energy for 5 years. So we should do bottom up approaches as well as top down approaches. So I think that to light up the world, we should also put the power in the hands of the people.
I'm sure there are young listeners out there who want to make a positive impact to communities. What sort of advice would you give to those who have decided to commit themselves, putting their talent or energy into social entrepreneurship?
I always tell young people, try to do your share, whether to volunteer, to donate a little bit of your salary or your money, or if you have the capacity, is to start it up. When you do not do your share, it leaves it for others to take up that capacity. So everybody has to push for us to be able to have a world that we can live in, especially those that live in great abundance with technology, with ideas, with mentors. Go out of your country. As you're traveling, do take some time out of your travel to take a serendipity walk and look at the problems that are out there. And if you have a brilliant idea, is taking that idea and pushing forward with it. Some ideas can change the lives of many, and there are brilliant young people all around the world. It's just sometimes we don't tap into them as much. There's this feeling that if it's a big problem, you give it to a large agency like a government or a large institution. But sometimes there's a social enterprise, which is some idea based on a B Corp or a corporation for good, can grow from a small little corner of your house into a global operation such as ours.
Wise and inspiring words. I'm sure those of us who wish to make a difference in the world will take a lot away from the advice. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Special thanks to my guest, Illac Diaz, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Do remember to subscribe and like this podcast so you know when a new episode drops. You can find CNA's climate and sustainability coverage online at cna.asia. The team behind this podcast is Hope Ning, Daniel Lee, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Julie Yu, signing off.